Yeah, so this one that's the systems building, that's a really and down below on the floor is like and everyone wears jeans and polo shirts and uniforms and it's the army research lab part of AFC. And then it's an entire floor and I guess perhaps 25% of it goes out there. 25% is Army Research Lab, and then 50% is just kind of offices that are like small, 1,000-foot square foot offices that khaki, EAE, all these big, industrial military complexes come in once they come to review. So for years, I don't want to say years, for quite some time, I was the company that was based here on the 16th floor. That was among the sort of companies that are doing AR, and VR, and machine learning, and companies making golf balls go really far. Really funky shit, right? But then I discovered the consultancy that did basically an IT management, consultancy, basically management consultancy, whatever you want to call it. Here at the government, different languages in terms of figuring out how to navigate the bar and blah 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 blah. So for a while I was really popular. Right? It was like, oh, DIUX thing, and that's venture capital. Then Applex came in the first year. Actually, Army Futures across it, dropped it on the 8th floor. And so from that first I was popular because I was the one that understood the huge code, the DSS, meaning the top secret facility, all the stuff that is perhaps Mandarin to most, but I understood it. Since then, GC is coming. That's where they're coming in with the big, billion-dollar businesses, trying to flex, trying to do stuff. Yeah, so, like, I was.
Check one, check one, check one. Check, 1, 2, check.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jim Penman-Morin. I'm the co-director of the Texas chapter of the Truman National Security Project, and really want to welcome all of you here today. This is the first of a series of 3 panel discussions we're doing on energy, water, climate change, and how that relates to domestic and national security. Just a little bit of background about the Truman Project, which most of you probably haven't heard of before. Truman Project and its 501c3 counterpart, the Truman Center, been around for about 15 years now, and exists to help people connect national security with other issues that we address as a people through government, right? And so, for example, I as an Army officer, serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, found that like a lot of my soldiers didn't have enough background in their public education and things like world cultures and world religions, and that was like a real problem as they're leading small units in a place like Afghanistan, right, or like Iraq. It's hard to understand the problems you're having between the Shia and the Sunni if you don't know what the difference is, right? And that's always been true. Perhaps it's nowhere more true when it comes to energy and national security and how much those are overlapped. Truman started a project called Operation Free about 10 years ago, specifically focused on this issue and held events somewhat like this, bringing in retired Navy admirals and former U.S. Senator John Warner to talk about how national security was so connected with energy and climate change, and how in order to really ensure a safe future for our country, we had to focus on those things. And that is a great way to bring people together and kind of open up minds and ears on topics that people who care a lot about national security often don't have a big interest in climate change, or aren't coming from like the classic environmental background that so many of us who do care about the issue come from, right? And so we started exploring about a year ago the idea of, specifically when it comes to water and agriculture and food, how does that tie into national security? And the Texas chapter we kind of jumped up and raised our hands because I think nowhere more true that energy plays a role in our economy. There's nowhere more true where water can either be a blessing or a scourge, right? And there's no more, I think, in our country that climate change is going to have a dramatic effect on what this state looks like and how we live. And so we offered to convene these conversations, been working on it for a better part of a year now, identifying interesting speakers and trying to set this up. So we're excited to finally kick it off. We will do, this is a 3-part series, as hopefully you know. So this Wednesday, next Wednesday, so that'd be the 6th. Here it'll be on the 8th floor in Capitol Factory. And then on the following Wednesday, it'll be on the 13th, it'll be an evening reception, and we'll, or kind of late afternoon. I think it's a 5 o'clock kickoff, but watch your inboxes because we'll send out a reminder. And we'll do kind of a happy hour instead of just lunch, right? And so to kind of kick it off. But then in the future, in the spring, we're hoping to do a similar series on another topic and just continue, or for us here in Texas, trying to become a convening force to help people have conversations about issues that, we should all be talking about. And so today, Deluge and Drought, right, we're talking about water. And really, I think the heart of this conversation will be about the importance of water, which I think everyone, you kind of know it generally, but we've got 2 speakers here to talk specifically about, their careers in water, what they've learned about its importance to societies and communities that they've worked in. And then in future sessions, we'll kind of explore about, what that means and when it comes to security, what it means when it comes to food security as well as national security. So I'll let them kind of introduce themselves a little bit. But we have Sarah Evans, who's one of our chapter members, and Suzanne King, an esteemed expert in this field. If you guys want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about your background, I think it'd be great.
So I am a Truman member as of a couple of years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. I have found myself in the field of water, first doing international clean water projects, fundraising and implementation for deep boreholes, pipelines, rainwater harvesting, mostly in Africa. I went to undergrad here at UT, then went to law school in Dallas, worked there for a while, moved back to Austin, and then started this nonprofit, Well Aware, which is Austin-based but working internationally. We've also just recently launched a for-profit company that does consulting, and we're building a software to help further support these communities through their clean water needs for rural water supply specifically. But I've also found myself in some groups and some conversations learning more about the impact of the compromise in water quality and water quantity globally, and how that will affect us all, specifically in our national security.
Hi, my name is Suzanne King. I'm also an Austin native. And let's see, I went to UT as well, and I knew I wasn't a scientist necessarily, and I thought communications would be a good avenue to go, because I feel like if you can communicate effectively, it can help make a positive change. So that's why I chose communications. And was eager to get into the environmental field, but had some other jobs along the way, and finally made my way using sort of my background in marketing and business development towards something I'm passionate about. And I started working for a company called Enernoc, which focuses on energy efficiency and demand response, which in my mind was a way to indirectly help with water efficiency, because reducing the amount of power plants or energy usage can help us conserve more water. And so I worked for several different types of companies, mainly around water conservation and water efficiency. So from outdoor irrigation, smart irrigation types of companies, to rebate programs, to apps for residential consumers to understand their usage better. And currently I work for a company called Hydrometrics, which focuses on reducing the water usage across all types of commercial and institutional buildings. So they actually focus on indoor water conservation by recommissioning indoor fixtures like toilets and showers and sinks. And so they actually are able to save like 25 to 40%. A lot of times that's because a toilet, for example, it's a 1.6 gallon flow toilet. Actually, although it was designed for that, it actually uses more like 2.3 to 2.5 gallons for various reasons. And so by recommissioning, recalibrating it to use the type of water it was designed for, that has that difference, getting back to 1.6 from 2.5, it has a cumulative effect across the building or a campus of buildings. So that's what I do. I work for Hydrometrics, and we're focusing on water conservation. Just briefly before that, I studied integrated water management in Australia. So I'm passionate about the topic, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, I mean, you guys touched on it a little bit, but did you see yourself going into water when you started your careers? And, you know, if not, what about water, you know, engaged you so early on that made you want to kind of devote the bulk of your professional life to water?
I did not think that I would end up in this field. I did, coincidentally though, I like to mention that I did study civil engineering for a couple of years in undergrad. And then when I was in law school, I clerked for the EPA in clean water, which is coincidence, but maybe in retrospect, not so much. But I accidentally found myself working on a project in Kenya to do a water well 12, 13 years ago, because a friend had reached out to ask for my help in fundraising and setting up the legal structure for a nonprofit to be able to purchase some goats and cows for this community in Kenya. And I definitely wanted to help, but I got more involved with the cause, and what I started learning about the water issues and the global water crisis and the impact on the unavailability of water throughout the entire community and the region and the country and the continent. It inspired me to convince this group of friends that we would instead raise the money to drill a water well in this community. And we got very, very lucky on the first water well, but on that first project, I could see the incredible impact that this basic necessity was going to have on a community that did not have it at all before. Then I also saw how most of these projects were being done ineffectively, and most of them were broken. So I decided I wanted to drop everything else and figure out how to do it well, no pun intended. And I put together a technical team of experts who know a lot more than I do about the hydrogeology and engineering that we do daily. But we've built a model and a team and a lot of success since then. So no, I didn't know, but I love it. I'm glad I'm here.
That's amazing. I'll try and follow that. So I was always passionate about environmental topics since I was really little. But I think through some soul searching, I tried as I was starting my career to figure out what within that specifically. And so through some soul searching, I just realized water, obviously it's the basis of life, and we're all dependent on it, everything we do, every single thing. So I thought I should focus on that. And slowly but surely, after figuring out what skills I had, generally, then I was able to apply that to work in that field. And so first indirectly through energy efficiency, and then most recently over the last, several years in water. So yeah, through some soul searching, basis of life.
Yeah. Yeah, so Sarah, your story reminds me of a funny experience I had in my first mission in Afghanistan, which we're out, this is early 2003, and we're looking for the Taliban, and we roll into this village, and some of you here I know have been to Afghanistan, and you know that the first thing they do is invite you in for tea. It's a very important, cultural thing for the Pashtun people that inhabit eastern Afghanistan, and so we're trying to kind of build relationships with these people, and we have truckloads of school supplies and humanitarian daily rations, which are basically giant like MREs that will feed you for a day, humanitarian daily ration. And thousands of dollars worth of things that we've flown in from the United States. And so we asked the village elder, what we could do for his community. And he strokes his long white beard, takes a sip of tea, and says, "A mating pair of American goats." And we all kind of chuckled at that, right? I mean, we don't have any of those, but I think to your point, right? It only helps to have those goats if you can give them water, if you can feed them. So could you elaborate a little more on how you've seen the impact of water on rural communities in which you've worked?
Yeah, and we often refer to the results of our work with these sustainable projects that are built well and can last a long time. We refer to that as our ripple effect. So just as Suzanne said, nothing really can be done if there's not reliable, clean water available anywhere. And so we do often see people come in and they're building schools, providing clinics, providing supplies. None of this can be sustainable or sustained if there's not a source of clean water there. So in a lot of these rural communities, that's their livelihood, is the livestock. And if there's not water to water the livestock, and especially now, more and more over time, that water tables are dropping. And so if people are used to digging these shallow holes to water their cows and goats, which is, the livelihood of their family, if they can't access that water anymore, then that's going to devastate the entire community. And so it's not just that, it's also disease rates. So if water that is available is not safe to drink, which it often is not, most surface water is contaminated, and it causes all kinds of illness. I think it's the number one cause of death for children under 5 in these regions is unsafe water, because it causes dysentery and they can't be treated. And then to education, especially education for young girls. So once a young woman hits puberty and there's no sanitation or a place to wash at school, she drops out of school and she gets behind, and then that's the end of her education. So I think that the statistic is that for every additional year a girl's in school, her future income goes up 12%. And that is a huge impact, not just for her, but for her family and her future children. And then gender equality, because in these regions, women and children are responsible for collecting the water and treating the water and providing it for their families. And once they don't have to do that anymore, then women get to start businesses and spend time with their kids and be educated, and that too changes everything. But you have to start with the water. The water has to start first. If something else comes and they don't have water, then you got to find somebody to do the water.
Same kind of question, but applied to urban areas. How does water affect, their growth?
In every way. I mean, gosh, from the businesses, from Capital Factory having, bathrooms here for us to use, to building, to the energy that we use. I mean, everything. And also not just within Austin, but the communities around it. So we can think about it in so many different ways, but water, from affecting rice farmers downstream to how we, build our buildings, like the Austin Library, has the on-site recycling, and where our regulations are heading towards on-site recycling or reuse. The laws around whether you can use reused water, reclaimed water on your lawns or public lawns. So where we pull our water from, and how we're impacted by lakes upstream from us. So it's all interrelated. We're not, as I know one of your questions you asked earlier was like separately before this panel was around whether we can do this in a vacuum, and we can't. It's all very interconnected. So I don't know if you want me to expand on that, but
How elastic is water consumption in an urban area? Like I'm not a farmer. I could be wrong, but I picture you grow rice off the Colorado River. There's amount of water you need for that. But for those of us who live in the city and the suburbs, how elastic is our consumption?
Well, I think we need a certain amount, of course, every day to drink and to make our food. But I think there's a lot of technologies or just practices that are available. Whether it's, as I mentioned, the company I work for, I wasn't aware before I started working for them. Just recalibrating the existing fixtures and doors can save money. The way you water, when you water. For example, now we know there's certain times you can water a day. That sounds very rudimentary, or elementary, but it's these practices. It sounds sometimes simple, and then there's some that are more technical in terms of innovations, but I think it's all available to us, whether it's through farming, using water more efficiently, to the way we manage our water in our buildings. There's technologies that are available for us. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and I think we're moving in that direction. But as they say, conservation is the cheapest form of water and energy efficiency. So
no, I don't. Neither of you are climatologists. But how does climate change affect the volatility of water supply? I think we all kind of have a sense of this by living in this state, right? And the two massive droughts we've had just in this last decade, coupled with 56 inches of rain in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. But could you guys talk a little bit more about the impact of volatility of water supply, and from what you know how climate change affects that?
Yeah, so most of my experience and knowledge is international, but I think I know that it's true globally that we're looking now at issues in both wealthy and poor countries that are in water quality and water availability. So what we're looking at now in Africa specifically, when we're trying to forecast our work into the future, is the different changes in rainfall patterns. And flooding, and then the rechargeability of the aquifers, which is in mountainous areas, you have runoff that recharges the aquifer. When the ice isn't there so much anymore and you're not getting the runoff, the aquifer and the water tables are dropping. With the rainfall specifically, the patterns are becoming heavier but shorter, which means that you're not getting the soil moisture that you need for agriculture to sustain these crops. It also means that surface water is less available and more contaminated. Saline is going up in water because of these droughts. And then nitrates too, from farming, from agriculture, and then storms that is distributing the nitrates, and so that's contaminating the water as well. So then that leads to not just our water and food insecurity that's growing over time, but also instability. So on a micro level, what we've seen in these places in rural East Africa is there's extreme tribal conflict when resources are low or unavailable. And we've been able to mitigate that, on small case-by-case basis by providing water in each region where each tribe is from. But that is going to be the same story for different countries that are sharing different water supplies. And so that's something that I think we should think about for national security, and the impact globally of how we're thinking about our water is also how we're going to think about making peace when it's more of a struggle for everybody and that resource is not as available. But that sounds very dark. I think as you said, there are definitely ways to address this. There's technology and innovation. I think we're all going to probably have to get a little more comfortable with genetically modified foods that take less water. And then just behavior changes, right? I mean, there's so many things that we use and consume that take too much water that we just don't need. And thinking more along the lines of high nutrient foods that are easier to grow and we can share more readily.
A little bit, I'd like you to expound on that a little more. Yeah, thanks. If you could expound on that just a little bit more, and like I wonder if as Nairobi grows into a global alpha major city, are they using more water, and how is that affecting aquifer levels? And it sounds like in your work you're seeing globally what we've seen a lot of in this country, with this an urban-rural divide. And so many things about politics, but specifically water. So a little more about that would be fascinating.
Yeah, we're having issues in Nairobi a lot right now. We have work in Nairobi that is very difficult to plan for and to execute and to implement because the aquifer in Nairobi is dropping rapidly. It's being overdrawn. It's becoming less possible for people without a lot of money to be able to access this groundwater. Unless you're a large company and you can pay off the government to get a permit to drill and then extract the water. So it's a big challenge, and it's causing more of this disparity between the haves and the have-nots, which is also dangerous. I don't know specifically what Nairobi plans on doing about this besides restricting the permitting process, but we are keeping a close eye on it. It's going to be a problem, yeah.
Suzanne, I'd like to hear more about your understanding of urbanization and how that ameliorates or exacerbates the problem about water supply.
Sure, yeah, we do. It can get super technical, of course, or it can stay super high level, this conversation, because it's so complex. But, urbanization in many ways impacts, of course, our water from more impervious ground. So we have water, when it does hit the ground, it flows a lot more quickly to our rivers or to our waterways. So we have difficulty in treating it as well, but also figuring out where it goes, as we have flooding issues as well, more extremes, as you mentioned as well. So the extremes of floods, the shorter, more intense rains versus the droughts. And so how do you plan for that in terms of urbanization? You have more people coming to a city, so you have to plan for larger pipes to supply water. But then if you have times of drought, if the water's not flowing through, it causes an issue as well. So there's this issue of capacity in our infrastructure, which can get pretty technical. But so how do you plan for those extremes? Because also those very pipes have to be washed out. So if you're in a water-constrained area, you actually have to flow water through there, flush them out once in a while as well. So it's this dilemma that that urban or engineers have in terms of the water infrastructure. How do you plan for the peak capacity or peak flows, and then those extreme droughts? So that's an issue, as well as just the microclimates. Walking around as downtown, you can tell if it's super hot. It feels hotter in certain areas and cooler when you're obviously by trees or near waterways. So the way we plan our urban areas, which there's a lot more talk now about green infrastructure, as a way to not only when we do have higher rains, to let the water flow in a way that's when it hits our waterways going to not cause major erosion. It will be cleaner, the quality will be higher, as well as obviously it will improve our ecosystems and our quality of life. So just walking around downtown or in urban areas by waterways, by trees, it's better for our own well-being mentally, but also environmentally. So how we plan for that. And Austin is a good example of work that they've done. I don't know if anyone's heard of Austin Water Forward. So yeah, the task force was created several years ago to work on, water over the next 100 years and what our infrastructure will look like. And so they based it on integrated water management and really the interconnectedness, not only technically, environmentally, also regarding social equity and other issues. So that's something that they feel is very innovative, and hopefully will become something that is enacted over the next few years. But from on-site reuse to green infrastructure, so thinking in those terms for Austin and the surrounding communities. So.
Now, you said you came to water by way of energy efficiency. I wonder if you could help us understand the connections between energy and water use. I think there's a lot of things that surprise people when they start digging in.
Yeah, that's another really complex topic. I guess it all, is all interconnected. And yeah, I mean, of course, it takes a lot of energy to move and clean water, and it takes a lot of water to make energy, whether it's, finding energy or creating energy. So I think that's, the energy water nexus, energy food water nexus is a big, buzzword or topic. But there are, of course, different energy sources use different amounts of water. They have bigger water footprints, which most folks might be aware of already. But that's another benefit of renewable energy as well, is just wind and solar uses less. Of course, nuclear is one of the highest users of water. So when we consider ways to move forward and improve issues around climate change and energy, thinking about the water footprint as well. Another thing that I just want to touch on is, speaking of energy usage to clean water or create water, not create, but get water, is, desalination is something that people talk about a lot as silver bullet, as a panacea, if you will. And, recently I've seen a few articles touch on, the negative impacts. It was a conversation I would go to a lot of conferences, and people were just like saying, desal's the way, we can just desalinate our way out of this issue. And nobody really wanted to talk about the unknown risks. So now I've been seeing a little bit more about that, which is good in terms of the conversation is being opened up. Desalination, I have a lot of concerns about it personally, but from sucking in the water from the ocean and what it does to marine life, but the amount of energy it requires and materials to clean that water, and then the byproduct that's created and where they send it out. Sometimes it's in a ground pond, but sometimes they send it right back out to the ocean, which I don't know what the impact would be in terms of acidification or other issues. But a lot of things for us to consider, that there's no silver bullet, but there are some better solutions. Like when we think about, of course, everything has its pro and con when you talk about wind or solar, but it's better in terms of water footprints, and desal is not necessarily the answer.
Sarah, anything to add?
I agree. Yeah, and it's good to see people now talking about what the implications of large-scale desal would be, because there is this incredible amount of waste that's concentrated chemicals that will further just contaminate the ground and make soil not able to grow food, and then the energy that's required. It's not feasible in the rural places where we work. It's simply not, because of the expense in treating it with the energy and then managing the waste from that. So, agree.
Now, you mentioning Kenya and the tribal conflict reminds me of a fascinating fact that a lot of people don't know, unless you majored in military history in college, which not the most useful, but you get some interesting things. The French Revolution was preceded by a drought. There's a reason that the French people were crying out for bread, and Marie Antoinette offered cake, right? And the current war that's tragically winding itself to a conclusion in Syria, also preceded by a drought that was itself exacerbated by climate change. Now, Mark Twain reported on an old saying in the Old West that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over. And, as a water expert, Sarah, what was it that attracted you to apply and join the Truman National Security Project? What connections did you see?
Besides the whiskey. Drink a lot of whiskey. A good friend of mine, Marla Keenan, reached out to me and told me about the Truman National Security Project, and my first reaction was, I know nothing about that. How would I ever add value to this really important group of people? But as she and I had more conversations, and I realized that I actually, the field that I'm in, and not just the experience, the knowledge I've gained so far, but what I will continue to work on and grow into and know, I think will offer value to the group as we navigate what's going to happen with national security when water becomes more and more of an issue. So I was very excited once I realized that, to be able to join and be a part of the discussion. I'm not a fabulous member, but I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that I can be helpful.
You're doing a good job today. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Suzanne, I'd be curious on your thoughts on the connections between one community's use of water and how that impacts the other. And I know, for example, here in Texas, if you go to El Paso, there is just a trickle of water in the Rio Grande flowing out from New Mexico, where they have a lot of chili peppers to grow, and a lot of, of course, important agriculture. And throughout the course of the Rio Grande through Texas, most of that water is coming from Mexico. And at some point, Mexico might want some of that water. But I'd be curious of your experience on, how connected water is between one community and the other. Or is this something where, I have a well, I'll save some water. We in Cedar Park can deal with this ourselves.
It's such a complex topic. I don't even know where to start or end. But we can talk locally or globally. One of the first projects I did for my master's program was looking at the Three Gorges Dam in China, which is this massive dam that basically flooded out communities. So that has a real impact. And so if you're thinking about, how communities are impacted, we have, of course, people might have some background knowledge of the issues we've had in Austin and the water that we want to keep here versus sending downstream. It's all interconnected with every community. For example, I had classmates, one from Jakarta, and she worked for the municipal government there in terms of water management. And they have millions of dwellers, illegal dwellers on the rivers upstream from them. And how do you move millions of people once they've already lived there? Not only is the litter, the trash is going into the rivers, but cleaning that water later. So it has social impacts. Obviously economic ones, as we've seen in California with the droughts and the impacts on farmers and agriculture, but it's all interrelated. We're not, whether it's the genes we buy and what happens to the waterways in India and the dying of the water, it's all interconnected. It's eventually it's the beaches we swim in eventually. So I could expand more or just stop there, but it's very interconnected, and we don't live in a vacuum. Yeah.
Any other examples would be, I think, interesting.
Let me think here. I'm sure you have some good examples in terms of communities as well.
Yeah, and there's an international discussion now happening with the trans-boundary aquifers and water sources, surface water and groundwater, to try to start to figure this out before it becomes a bigger issue. I don't know that anybody has figured it out yet. Now, what we've done, like I said, on a very, very small scale, is trying to make sure that these different, pieces of the community that are going to have conflict are served in some way. But if, once the resource is less and less, and again, unless behavior changes significantly, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's part of the integrated water management background, as well as looking at the social piece as well. It's not just this is our land. We're borrowing water from other places as well, but also as we have these conversations, the social equity piece, how making sure everyone has a voice at the table and how they're impacted. So that's a huge piece of moving forward as well.
Yeah, and researching for this panel, I just found out that so in Texas, our rule is the rule of capture for when it comes to groundwater. If water is below, you own everything from the sky to the inferno, everything below your property, and so you can use that water as much as you want, with a few fairly recent exceptions in state-sponsored groundwater conservation districts, and that is not the case in New Mexico. And so if next time you guys fly west, or if you're like me and you have 5 kids and you have to drive west during summer vacation, you'll notice how green and irrigated everything is around Lubbock and throughout the Texas Panhandle. And as soon as you cross that New Mexico line, it's just high plains, dry high plains, grasslands. And that's because New Mexico doesn't have that same rule, and it's very upsetting to people in eastern New Mexico, because that Oglala aquifer, which runs all the way up to Nebraska and is a huge, I think it creates something like 25% of the food in the United States, is all is getting taxed pretty much without regulation in our state. So I guess that kind of begs the question, now that we've hopefully scared everyone enough about the size and magnitude and complexity of the problem. I'm curious both your thoughts as to, is this something we legislate our way out of? Is it something we innovate our way out of, educate our way out of, conserve our way out of? Kind of the solutions would be, I would love to hear your thoughts on.
Yes, right? All of the above. I think that each of these things needs to be addressed individually. Definitely education. There's some very exciting innovation, maybe even some variations in desal that might work. And then I already say legislation, but I have to go back again to behavior. So I guess that it goes along with the education piece, but things just have to. We'll have to change, and we can get in front of it and see if we can't accomplish that in advance of sort of the critical moment, or we'll have the critical moment and then people will have to. And I guess, I'll leave it at that because you know more about this than I do.
Not necessarily. You know a lot, obviously. Is this on? Is it work? Should be on. Hello? Okay. So yes, all of the above. I agree. Education for sure, which is what each of us are doing here as well. It's so complex, and climate change, the whole topic can be incredibly daunting. And I've been reading recently about this climate anxiety and eco-anxiety, which, my goodness, it's a whole other topic. But it makes sense. Do you just have apathy and put your head in the sand, or try and get involved in some way? And there's the individual behaviors, but I have a strong, hope that. More on the business level, we have such a huge impacts, from the products that we create and the way we manufacture them, which has I think one of the biggest impacts. We have our individual behaviors, but also in terms of especially global businesses, how we create products. And it's hopeful for me when I see companies. I believe it's Loop. I can't remember the exact name, but where he's trying. This founder is. Have you heard of it? Yeah. So they're trying to have reusable cans, for example, for Haagen-Dazs or for all these big companies like Johnson & Johnson or PG&E, et cetera, to have reusable materials instead of this one-time use and you throw it away. So all the energy and water it uses to clean or recycle, to throw away and figure out landfill. So if we can solve it from how we create our products and then use them, I think that could have a really huge impact on us as individuals, because when we go to the stores as consumers, we have limited options. So if we can improve our options, I think we can have a real ripple effect and impact things on a wider level as well.
And don't they say too, like, of the reduce, reuse, recycle, reduce is most important, and then reuse, and then recycle?
Yeah.
Is that what you've heard?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's sort of like conserving water is the cheapest water you'll have, right? So the less energy to recycle, the less manpower or just materials and energy. Yeah, absolutely.
And with plastics also, and other kinds of things that take a lot of chemicals. I think I feel like I have a gift in the perspective that we get to have as we travel internationally so much, and we get to spend so much time in these communities that have very, very little. But once their water is there and they begin to thrive, they're doing great, right? They're not these like rabid consumers like we are here. So it's just so possible to cut back and reuse and then recycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to answer your question, we agree above all for everything, from Austin Water Forward to other, international agreements, whether it's Texas and Mexico or across state in terms of how we share our water resources and how we manage those. But also just business has such a huge impact on our everyday lives. So helping empower us as individuals to be able to make better decisions is going to impact us in terms of our water usage as well.
How do we provide that data? And Sarah, I'm specifically giving you an opportunity to plug your company here, which you've been too modest to do, but I know both of your companies deal so much with data, and how does that help drive the conversation and more informed choices?
Yeah, well, so what we've been collecting data in a kind of a scrappy way, because where we're working for the most part doesn't have a lot of this data. So we've been piecing together information on groundwater depths and quality, and changes in water tables in our work. But what with the new company that we've just created, which is still very new, once we have onboarded more and more entities onto our software, and they're inputting information on all of these different things that we've already been working on for years, as you know, water tables, water usage, changes in water quality, we'll have a robust set of this data to be able to inform future work and advise people on where they should stop extracting groundwater, or where they might be able to see trends in water quality changes for water that might become dangerous, or we need to access water in a different place. So I think that's a very, very big piece of this puzzle too, is actually having the data available, reliable data that's collected in a uniform, consistent way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the issues. I remember something I studied in my master's program is urban metabolism. So it's thinking of a city, whether it's a precinct or a city or a state, just drawing the boundaries and then measuring inflows and outflows, basically, and what happens along the way with the water or any other resource, energy. And it was really difficult to do that exercise when I looked at Austin, and you can apply that to any city for various reasons. I mean, the way we collect our data, the way we measure it, and everyone. Most are different from one boundary line to another, how we collect our data, what data we collect. So if we're comparing, whether we're benchmarking, whether we're trying to make improvements, consistent types of data is really important. So yeah, the way we measure hydrometrics is we actually use algorithms and seeing, use patterns to see what is the savings potential based on, historical information. But in terms of data on a grander scale, whether it's locally, sometimes you don't even have the data of how much water we're pulling out, or there's metering issue on a building versus, irrigation. So having that data, that visibility is going to be huge, on a building scale level, but also just citywide and statewide and beyond. So we can actually
provide
make
that
a change.
data to municipalities mostly, or businesses, or who consumes that data and who uses those benchmarks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say scientists probably, people who are doing the research, but yeah, municipalities as well. I think even businesses as well in terms of benchmarking their own usage and trying to find ways that they can save.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think everyone really.
Yeah.
And even us as residents, sorry. One of the companies I work for, Drop Counter, they have an app that helps residents see their water usage. So yeah, I think we want visibility at every level for the most part.
Yeah, that's great. That was Drop Counter?
Yeah, they have actually the app for City of Austin.
Okay.
For Austin residents.
Okay. Yeah. I'll see if it works for Cedar Park as well. It'll be, I have a similar app for energy consumption, Sense, which allows me to basically berate my kids, and I can tell they left one light on. And so it'd be great to be able to do that with water as well. Now, all of you, by showing up today, we didn't really tell you this, you guys kind of signed up for a mission, which is to help share with other people what you've learned, right? Because this is a concentric circle information operation, right? And so I'd be interested in the advice the two of you can give to everyone here about how they can talk about these issues, with their neighbors and their family around, Thanksgiving dinner here in a few weeks. How can they help them understand why this is important and what they can do about it?
I think in my conversations with my family, who just kind of, for the most part, don't want to think about it or even know about it, because then they have to think about it. Getting rid of the fear, I think, is the first step to be able to open up the dialogue and then begin the education, because it is very, very scary, and we have so much access to the news and the code red information about climate change and everything that's happening. I think it's just understanding that it's okay to be aware. It's good, we have to be aware, but you don't have to be afraid, because there actually are plenty of things that we can be doing, and just have to digest the fact that it will take some changes, and change is hard, but change is necessary to preserve what we have for ourselves and our planet. So assuaging the fear.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think, moving away from the fear, of course, or the lack, the disempowerment that we can feel when we leave after seeing a documentary
Good way to
about
put it.
climate change. So whatever way, I think, as an individual, just whatever work you do or volunteer work, it's all interconnected, whether you're helping plant trees or whether you're giving to buying the holiday cards. When you buy those, it's recycled materials, but also they're planting trees. So whatever you can do, a small piece individually, but also when you're talking with those around, definitely what's working. I would start sharing what's actually working. Cool innovations like the Loop company, or companies that are selling clothing that care about the water usage. Whatever inspires you. That's what I would say. I think we have to focus on what's working as well, and especially around our Thanksgiving table.
There's a really good book called Abundance. Have you guys read this? It's kind of old. It's 2013 or 2014, and it talks about 9 global crises, but all these people are doing about them, and it's really exciting. It's a great book to be educated and informed, but also be inspired and feel a bit more positive about that. I recommend that book. It's a good one. It's a whole chapter on water.
I want to read that.
All right. Well, so we got about 10, 15 minutes left, and I know all of you are smart enough to be here, so I'm expecting some smart questions from the audience. And so, so just kind of open Q&A. Rakia, we'll hand you the microphone.
Oh, I get to go first. Yay. Well, I would say that I'm one of the 10 conservatives in the country that actually wants to have a conversation about climate change. So I just want to say thank you guys for being here and allowing me to be a part of this discussion. I think that first and foremost, I want to make sure that we're all operating in shared facts. And my question to you is, as I'm out there inviting elected officials and organizations to learn more about climate change and learn more about the environment, whether that's through fact-finding missions, conversations, dinner discussions, what can we do from the conservative perspective to bring you all more into our conversations to provide hands-on, real-time information to elected officials who may not be operating with facts?
Yeah, I'm not as knowledgeable about the folks that you're working with necessarily, but or some of their perspectives specifically. But I think wherever you can show somebody in a friendly way, something that is actually really happening, whether it's actually a field trip type of thing, where they actually can see it and it resonates with them, whether it's a local community. Sometimes a documentary, but also how things that are working, whether it's if they're more inclined in terms of fiscal conservatism as well, or conservatively fiscal, you know what I'm trying to say, showing them, of course, the finances behind that. I mean, there's a lot of cases, business cases, and if you have somebody else who can come to the dinner table, who can speak that language that resonates with them around economics, or other types of issues that resonate with them, but they're also bringing in, and by the way, we also have the sustainability story. By the way, we're also helping XYZ, whether it's, reforestation or whether it's, energy efficiency, and it has created X number of jobs, it saved us X number of dollars. And we have more customers because of that as well. We have this great, story to tell, and our reputation is awesome. So that's
Williamson County, right? It's a success story in that regard, right? Georgetown, just up the road. Yeah. Very conservative community that really embraced environmental change and approached it from an economic point of view and perspective. And they've made a lot of progress. It's pretty inspiring. That's pretty much the extent that I know of it, but it'd be good to check that out.
And Georgetown is, I think their goal is to be zero.
Did everybody hear that? Maybe you give her the microphone for a second.
There's a nonprofit that's a conservative nonprofit called American Conservation Coalition, and they're focused on changing the narrative with conservatives in the Republican Party about climate change.
Yeah, and I think another area that you can build on is so many conservative legislators here in this state, right? They represent rural districts, and our next two panels, we'll kind of talk more about agriculture. We'll talk more about rice farming, farther down the Colorado. So I think hopefully that'll give you some good information if you can attend. But then also I just want to plug Operation Free and Truman, I mean, that's exactly what we exist to do. Is, there's a lot of people in the federal and state level that won't take a meeting with the Environmental Defense Fund. They won't take a meeting with the Sierra Club, but you get a group of Iraq vets in there, they're willing to listen, right? And I've one of my West Point classmates here, some other Army veterans I know in the room, and every time I talk to my classmates, regardless of how they vote, right, or their party affiliation, they're always really enthusiastic about this issue. Because I think there's one thing you learn by a 6 months or a year in Iraq or Afghanistan, it's like water is A, very heavy to carry, and B, extremely important, both to to what you're doing, but also the people that you're there to help protect. And the same thing goes absolutely with energy. You just really learn the cost of energy, the true cost of it. So the lady here had a question.
Do you see any other area in our world that's very much in danger of global insecurities besides the Middle East? Of military problems? This is directed to you, probably, Jim.
Yeah, we're going to build on that in the next couple of sessions. So stay tuned. And speaking of stay tuned, we should have warned you guys by the beginning that you're on candid camera. This is being webcast, and so that's why we're kind of insistent about microphones. But absolutely, you look at Bangladesh, which is surrounded literally by an iron fence from India on two sides, and then the neighbors in next door in Malaysia Burma are not big fans. A large percent of that country will be underwater by mid-century because it's very low lying, and where those people are going to go and how they force themselves in there is incredibly dangerous. But New York Times had a piece this weekend also about like what Thailand's coastline will look like and what Bangkok will look like by mid-century. But I think there's few areas where it's more obvious than Africa, as about how water constraints can lead directly to violence.
Another question.
Hey, I was just curious. I've read just like a little bit about the state's water plan here in Texas, and I know that the state has long had water plans, but I think currently somewhere only around 14% of the water plans have made any progress. I think only 7% have actually been fully completed. So I'm curious to know the projects within the plan. And so I'm curious to know sort of what does that mean for us as a state here in Texas? I know this is about much bigger than Texas, but just what does that mean in terms of our future and kind of if the plans are not moving as fast, if the implementation of those plans aren't moving as fast as they should, what does that mean for us broadly, I guess?
Yeah, thoughts on just the clock more generally.
Yeah, I do not know a lot about that. We do have an engineer on our team who works for the city of Austin in water. I can see if I can get some information and connect you. I personally don't know about that, but now I'm very interested as well. Besides the zebra mussel incident, I don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, I used to go to a lot of those meetings a few years back, and I haven't been as involved with that the last couple of years, but I would love to get more information as well and catch up on that, and I can send you some resources too. And it's a great question. I don't have the answer to, but it's an important question.
You were saying that the Texas Water Development Board?
That's who runs all that.
Yeah, and I just from there's a couple of state legislators who are very, very smart in this issue with Vicki Goodwin, and then Erin. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on her name. But the state legislator for Hays County, who's a professional environmentalist or water expert, a hydrologist, and I think one of the things that they have told me is that there's part of the problem is you have these groundwater conservation districts that get set up, but then they don't really get used. And a lot of it is just a self-confidence of the state in those districts in asserting their authority to say, no, you just can't pull all the water you want for this use. And that's kind of fundamentally uncomfortable in this state, right? And it certainly got its benefits and consequences, our love of independence. But it's an area where I think a lot of it is just having these dialogues and helping people understand why this is important, and this isn't just about government stepping on people's toes. So, we have another question in the back.
Yes. So I work in an Air Force organization that focuses on bringing in newer technologies and kind of modernizing the force. And so I'm curious with water issues in particular, if there's anything that you guys see the military being able to do to integrate newer ways of doing things or new technologies into like actual operations, as opposed to just like acknowledging that it's a problem.
I mean, Jim, this is probably you. I've had a little bit of interaction with some groups that are working with the military on the moisture in the air types of technology that are self-contained and mobile and can move from place to place, which works well in that situation.
Like a giant dehumidifier?
It's like a big swamp cooler.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there are actually a few different, probably several different companies that are popping up right now. And it for development type of work, it doesn't really make sense, not right now anyway, not for cost effectiveness or even production rates. But for the military, it's a great solution for them in certain situations, and not just to satisfy their needs, but also to experiment with the technology to inform future iterations of that same kind of a product. It's pretty interesting to watch.
And I guess in terms of, I don't know if you were referring to military bases as well or more. So we actually do, so we actually do our work at military bases as well. So helping them realize like 25 to 40% in terms of, on average, in terms of water conservation. So that's like a real something you can realize very quickly, and that's an impact you can have very quickly. In addition to, I think so many things are applicable, especially to military bases. I don't know enough about Air Force in terms of their own travels and their own, what they need on the ground. But in terms of military bases, there's tons that can be done in terms of water conservation, whether it's outdoor or indoor. A lot of things that I'd be happy afterwards as well to give you some specific names. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add for the group's benefit is one of the fun things about being involved with Operation Free for the last 10 years is seeing how many technologies were grown by the Department of Defense as they started looking at energy. So, when I was in Afghanistan, we would have Black Hawk helicopters fly us batteries, nothing but AA batteries, because that's what powers your night vision goggles, your radios, and it wasn't long after this issue started really coming to the forefront that the Marine Corps developed the solar backpacks, right? Which now you can like buy at Academy or your average sporting goods stores, or another military technology that you can now get for camping is water filtration, like the straws where you just like put it right into a stream, and like what a life-changing thing that is in a lot of developing countries if they can only get it, and they do. But Sarah's giving me a head shake, but the military still spends, even in the Trump administration, I think it's $1.6 billion on energy and water research, just the research part. And from an organization that created the internet and largely created jet-powered flight and so many other technologies we just kind of take for granted. I think there's a lot of hope and potential for civilian and municipal use of things that the military is trying out now. So I was really excited to see you RSVP'd, and appreciate you coming. If you guys have anything else to add, or
No, I don't. It's not a good solution, typically speaking, in rural developing countries.
that's a teaser. Very fun.
Thanks for the great discussion. So you both mentioned data and the need for more or better data. I was wondering, just when you're in your work, what do you see as like the next big things that are missing or what's needed, sort of like next steps in addition to data? And then, what's your advice for young, like graduate students, people seeking to go into the world of water for their careers? Thanks.
I love this topic. Yeah, I mean, data, it's whether you're talking about Pecan Street project and what, they do in terms of data gathering and trying to work on water efficiency. The city level, I mean, I think we just need more consistent data, like data overall gives it visibility, like what we're pulling out, what we're actually recycling. So I think the data visibility, but also consistently from one city to another, one country to another, so we can actually like benchmark and compare and make improvements accordingly. But in terms of career stuff, I think that there's so much that can be done. I think it all depends on what your specific skills are and what your specific interest is. You know, if you're really into data, for example, that's a whole other field versus, you know, if you like, you know, speaking or doing business development. So you can apply it to so many things that are really important. Yeah, so we can definitely expand on that conversation after as well. But there's from R&D and research for universities to writing, to actually working for-profit companies who are inventing solutions that have huge impacts. So everything, no matter what, it's making a huge contribution.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and we have internships. So just saying.
And then obviously the best thing you could do is to come back next week for round 2 and the following week for round 3. Do we have any final questions?
One more.
Okay, yeah, please.
You mentioned the book Abundance. So for those of us who just love to absorb information, what else should we be reading?
You guys are the experts. You get the
There's a book, I'm blanking out on the title, but Hawken, he wrote recently like 100 solutions to combating climate change. Of course, Cradle to Cradle is a classic. I like the conscious capitalism as well. Just shows the financial. So when you're trying to sell it to somebody, you know, the idea of sustainability, I think that when you can talk about the successes that, you know, public companies or private companies have had, those are a couple of.
And then there's a book called Blood from a Stone, which was written specifically about water in Texas. It too is about 6 or 7 years old, but it's very informative. It's an easy read. And we were talking before the session about it's a fiction. It's science fiction. It's called Water Knife, but it's a really, really fascinating read, and it sort of forecasts what's going to happen in the United States with water. It's a little bit terrifying, but it's a good exercise for the mind, I think.
Can we squeeze in one more?
Yeah, and then one recommendation, a lot of my fun facts I've been throwing out come from this book, also about Texas, A Thirsty Land, The Making of an American Water Crisis, which is just, I think, about a year old and specifically, you know, deals with Texas, but kind of thinks of it, I think, correctly as a kind of a model for what can happen elsewhere in the country and world. But it's been pretty interesting. Yep, and we'll have, you know, some interesting experts next week, too, so.
I'm Jerry Rohn, CEO of TriTrack Motors. And we have a transportation system that can bring massive amounts of water across continents, like from Lake Victoria to the Middle East, to some of the hotspots, military hotspots. And so our push is that there's plenty of water, it's just in the wrong place. The Amazon River has a massive amount of water that comes out, dumps into the salty ocean. So the resources are there. The world is an abundant place, and God made it for us. And he knows how many people we're going to be here now. So you can be assured that there's plenty of water. We just need to be good stewards of that water, surface water and rain.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you're right, though. And I'll close with a Kennedy quote, which is always, you know, almost as good as a Mark Twain quote. And that's, you know, our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man. So thanks for coming. Hopefully you guys come back next week. Bring a friend or two. Let your friends know about it, and it should be great.